y'all doing today? This is Mini Coder coming back to you to continue the series in MVC, ASP.NET MVC to be exact. Last time we went over a visual diagram of the view or 10,000 foot view of what MVC means, what the structure and the workflow looks like, what the data workflow looks like, especially in the ASP.NET MVC application, and how it is used to separate, well, they call it separation of concerns, but basically the separation of data and the views and services, and how to keep them doing only what they need to do and nothing more. I'm going to bring up Visual Studio here. I'm not going to bring up the diagram in this one. I think I will probably be bringing it up in other ones, so I don't think it's necessary here. We're pretty much just going to set up the project. I'm going to go over the basics of what each project does, and what everything within, especially the MVC app, does. So we're going to start by doing an ASP.NET application. If you're in 2005, or 2015, I happen to be using Enterprise, but Community Edition, Professional, they all use the same exact templates. So let me uncheck this because we don't need to deal with any of that. Because we are not doing application insights, because this won't be published. Let's make this solution called employee directory, because I think that will make it easiest to make our view models and models, making employees, managers, directors, etc., titles, and all that kind of stuff. I know it's a typical way for learning a programming language in general, but I think it's a good way for us to understand what view models are versus models, DTO objects, and the like. So that's going to be the name of the solution. Let's make the project called employee directory dot client. Okay, you could use web client, it really doesn't matter. Click OK. Alright, so you have some options here. When you get very familiar with any of these, web forms, MVC, web API, even single application, you may want to go for the empty object project, and then you can select any of these. The reason I say that is because some of the templates do, if you've had any experience with templates in the past for Visual Studio, they can be bloated. They're meant for RAD development or rapid application development to some degree, and get you off the ground running. Once you are familiar, there is some bloat that you probably don't need. It'll like make that the home controller I'll be using as an example. You may not want the home controller. With Web API, they make some extra references and extra code that you may or may not need. So just in short, you may want to use it at some point. But for right now, we're going to use MVC. Obviously, because we chose MVC, that's checked and grayed out. We're not going to make ourselves a web API or web forms. I will be doing a tutorial series on web API at some point, most likely. Web forms, probably not. I'm not a big fan of that. Quite honestly, I think it's going to go away at some point. And we're going to choose no authentication. A lot of times we would do Windows or individual, but in this case, we're not going to. So I'm going to click OK, uncheck the Azure, and click OK. The Azure, if you have an Azure account, you can host this in the cloud. Since we're going to be doing all this locally, and the first time I tried to create this before I recorded, it took a long time to try to bind all that Azure stuff, so I didn't want to go there. So first thing you'll see is in a URL that actually points to an HTML file in your solution directory, It'll bring up this ASP application page. It has nothing to do with your actual project. It just happens to be a page that gives you links to various tutorials and examples to understanding Web API, SignalR, MVC in general, NuGet, which is a very helpful thing in the web world. If you're not familiar with it already, it's kind of a repository of third-party and even Microsoft code and utilities that can come in handy so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So the next thing we're going to do real quick is we're going to just add a new project. This is going to be a class library. So we'll go to Visual C#, class library, and then let's call this employee directory. Directory dot services. And this is where our services will live. Now, yes, absolutely, you can make folders inside of here. I like to keep them clean as separate projects. Some might say it's more of an onion architecture and it may be overkill. For me, it makes me feel warm and fuzzy doing it this way, so that's how I do it. Directory services, actually this will be data. So the services will obviously hold the services, the data will hold things like the repositories, and we're going to probably use EF Entity Framework as our hook into .NET or into the database. It's quick, it's easy, and it's not really the data side of things, or the database itself is not really what this series is about. So we'll be using that as a rapid development of SQL. So let's just wrap those up real quick. So just going down the line here, I'm sure most of you have probably at least done some projects before. If you haven't done any projects in C#, I will put a link in the upper left hand corner to go to my my Programming 101 tutorials. They go soup to nuts from pseudocode right up to understanding methods and C# and Visual Studio and all that good stuff. So if you need to do that, please feel free. This is more of a pseudo advanced, if you will. So let's close these classes that when you make a new library it creates. This app data, usually it holds some kind of data, whether it's a config file, an XML file, some kind of blob or data, or images that you may need as an embedded resource, or something that after compilation you need to access. That's a good place to put stuff like that. AppStart will hold all your configurations. We'll be going over route and bundle configurations and all that later. Content is going to basically keep all your CSS and your images that have to do with CSS. We won't be touching CSS much in this course. That's really not my forte. Coding is your controllers, which in our case right now, because we used a generic template, it created a home controller, which inherits from a, if you hover over it, a .NET abstract class called C#, called controller, and it has these three methods that all return action result, which we'll be going over later. Each one of these has a particular method. These methods will be called actions whenever you are actually referencing them in either views or anything like that. So remember that each method inside of a controller is called a action, and that's why you can see action result. Each one of these returns a type view. It's gonna, if you hover a view result, which inherits from action result. That's why that works. If we hover, if we go and open the parentheses to show our overloads, we have quite a few, 8. Most of the time what you'll probably be using is an object model right there. So that will be passing in the view model that will mimic what you want to show on the screen. View bags are a special type of object we'll be talking about later. And that's about it as far as a controller is concerned for now. Fonts shows stuff like glyphicons. Font Awesome would go in there. Again, we're not going to go over that. Models. Models and view models are somewhat interchangeable. I'm sure I'll get somebody that's going to give me a thumb down for that, but trust me, they basically are. MVVM pattern and the MVC pattern world are kind of merging together. So I will probably use models and view models pretty synonymously. Scripts just holds your JavaScript files, and then we come down to views. So let's open this up here. So let's just go to index. I'm not going to deal with, because we're already at 10 minutes, I'm not going to deal with about and contact. Now, sometimes you'll see errors come up when you first open a CSHTML. It's just it trying to rebuild and figure everything out. You'll notice that there's a whole bunch of div tags and HTML here. Now, if we run this baby, what you're going to see is there's actually going to be not only that code, but there will be a header and a footer. If people come from the web forms world, they are going to think of a site master, which would not be completely wrong. It is very similar. You'll see that there is a header with some a toolbar here with home, about, and contact all highlighting. If you hit about, it gives you some about information. Contact gives you about contact information, and hit home or application, it takes you back to home. You'll also notice that there's a date and some information on the footer. And every time you go to any of these, the header and the footer always follow. Sorry, I was trying to scroll down. You'll notice that it always follows no matter where we are. The way that happens is based on, let's pin it. I don't want to pin it actually. Is based on this layout.cshtml. So you will notice that there's this this HTML action link, which this converts to an A tag, and then you have the application name string, index, which is the action. Remember I told you in here that these are called actions, each one of these methods. So it's telling you, okay, I want you to give the user-friendly name of application name. I want you to look for the action index in the controller home. And then this is saying that the area, there's no area, which is fine. We might even talk about areas because areas don't commonly get used. And this is a nice way to throw a class in there if you want to. Navbar dash brand, if I were to guess, is probably a bootstrap class built in. And if you're not used to this new with the squiggly open close, that's stating to C# that you want to make an anonymous object. You can put anything in here you want. Let me break this real quick. You could put controller in here, the word controller, or co equals blah blah comma, and it won't bark at you because it's assuming you know what you're doing. So, just a quick 101 on that. I don't even think I brought that up in the beginners because that's really not a beginner thing. And you'll notice right in here, there's your home, your index, about, and contact, and there's your string value of about, home, and contact. Then you have this footer that's put everywhere. That's your footer. So this is exactly what it is. It's your layout for your whole site. And then you have this @render body. So what that says is whatever, when you go to the index action and it returns an empty view, it means that it wants to look for anything in the home controller folder with a index with a .cshtml with a name of index. So it's going to look at that and say, okay, whatever I find, throw into the @render body. So lo and behold, it will throw whatever's in the @render body. And you'll also notice viewback is being held here, and we'll talk about that later because we're already at 14 minutes. View start tells you tells the code at the application at the very start where the layout is going to be. which in this case is shared underscore layout, and any layout equals that. Web config. The web config is going to house a whole bunch of things. The biggest thing it'll show is there's a configuration setting here. With configuration settings, you will within here, actually right underneath configuration, but above configuration settings, you will put your connection strings for your SQL database. You can add keys in there to reference other things within C# or in the views. And you will also notice that any namespaces that it knows about, whether it's in the system or core of .NET, or lo and behold, your own namespace is also in here. So these are all things. There's also the compilations. There's whether it's integrated mode. You can turn debugging on in here. There's a whole bunch of stuff. If you haven't used web config, I highly recommend looking it up. Global ASX. The global ASX is just a application start spot. Actually, it's where various things are defined at startup. There's a few override methods, protected methods that you can override within here. Application start happens to be one. So anything that you want at startup, like registering any areas, which we're not talking about yet, any filters, any routes, which we'll be getting into, and any bundles. You can put any of your custom code in there that you want to start some kind of logger, some kind of event listener. You can, or a delegate, or something that you want to put in the web or IIS pipeline. You can do that here. There is also an application stop, and I believe there's an application on error, something like that you can catch anything prior to it hitting the yellow screen of death. The packages config will go over some other point, but basically anything that's in the NuGet packages that you're grabbing, this is what it uses to monitor when there's updates. There's your project.readme that we saw before. And this is the bottom level web config, which will hold most of your compilation, debug stuff, your entity framework stuff, because here it relates to the views only, or above. The web config here is related to the first thing that gets loaded, and it takes precedence over everything. So that's the basics. I think the next tutorial, what we'll probably do is we'll make a view model, or a model, whatever you want to call it. We won't go into entity or any of that stuff yet. We will make a new controller called employee controller or something to that effect, and we will make a view with that. And then from there, we are going to load it up and see what happens. So I'm going to try to keep these to 10 to 15 minutes. So I'm going to try to do little bits at a time. Again, I will probably open up what do you call it? I'm sorry, it's late at night. I will probably be bringing up the Visio diagram so that we can go over it and show which pieces we're working on at that time. So hope you enjoyed. As always, thumbs up, thumbs down. Thumbs down, please feel free to give me some feedback so I know what I'm doing wrong. And please, if you like the video, thumbs up, and feel free to subscribe. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.